carry over the weekend. We've been seeing the protests around the world spreading beyond the U.S. into the U.K. In Bristol. You know, the protesters took down
a statue.
The statue,
That's
yes,
right.
of a former slave trader, and dumped it into
into
the
into the river.
You know, it's spreading around the world, and it's here in Trinidad and Tobago as well, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, or perhaps we might be burying our heads in the sands. I don't know. We'll be carrying on that conversation this morning. We have a Milka senator later on in the program, but we start off this morning with two young people who took to social media to confront their own communities. I'm speaking about Anya Quesnel, writer, student of critical studies, and actor Charlie Reid. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining me here. And I want to ask both of you, perhaps Charlie, you could lead off, and then Anya, you can jump in. You guys created a stir and a bit of conversation on social media recently. What motivated you to write such open and honest, if I may say, pieces?
I think being in the States right now, I've noticed the uprising for the past couple of weeks. But about a week ago or around there, when I saw the Trinidadian business owners and Trinidadians making posts that were racist, problematic, and using this term, they seem to be justified in saying these things under this notion of every creed and race or something, this kind of idea that we were all neutral, so I can say my opinion. And then seeing my friends of color, who are Trini, also using that statement, every creed and race, as a way of kind of maybe distancing themselves from the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, I had this instinct of people, my Trinidadian friends, distancing themselves from this conversation that needs to be had. And I'm going to personally share my experiences to try to hold people accountable to having a conversation.
Mm-hmm. What about you, Anya?
What prompted me, I suppose, was my girls in a WhatsApp group chat because we frequently have conversations about race in Trinidad and Tobago, and that being such a complex, complicated conversation to have, and we generally find those lacking from the public sphere. And we were talking, and they said to me, "Well, why don't you share this publicly?" I was like, "Oh gosh, I'm afraid of social media because you say one thing and it takes off," which is exactly what's happened. Which is very encouraging that what I posted has gotten this much traction. I'm very, very excited to see that honest conversations are taking place. I'm excited that people are pushing back on me and just engaging. But yeah, again, same with Charlie. There's absence, I think, particularly from white voices on many different topics in public sphere, and that kind of distance, that kind of that contributes to the separateness of the white community, which leads to just division and compartmentalizing different communities, and then there's distrust among those communities. But the way we get over that is honest dialogue. So I'm very, very encouraged to see that the conversation like this is happening this morning.
Yeah. Well, let me stick with you, and then I'll come back to Charlie, because we quoted from you this morning. You said, by claiming that we don't see color, we don't see race, we are ignoring that certain bodies are marked differently to others and to harmful ends. When you tell your black friends that you do not see them as black, you're already displaying your assumption that blackness is inherently a bad thing. You're invalidating the lived experiences of that friend that have been shaped by their blackness, as yours have been shaped by your whiteness. You are not being racist when you acknowledge that race exists. You are being racist when you fail to acknowledge your own prejudices. You've put this out there as with regard to your experiences, but what has been the feedback from your community with regard to your comments?
Sure. The majority of feedback that I have received is from my very close family and friends who love and support me, and in their own ways beginning to do this work. I think I grew up in a very empathetic home environment. I think
Mm-hmm.
my parents, I almost get emotional. um, anyway, so yes, people close to me are supporting what I'm saying and like saying, yes, we need to have these conversations. Yes. I actually have not heard from a lot of white trainees that I don't know already. Because I just again heard from my friends and family. I'm also a bit disconnected because I mean in the US I wasn't able to come home when due to the border closure. And I am actually kind of astounded that I have not heard more. Um, and yeah, I think again that speaks to this lack of engagement from city members of the community in public discourse. So I think the fact that I don't really know what's going on speaks to my point that there is this disconnect, there is this lack of engagement.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I think that's how I answer that question.
I want you to weigh in on that, Charlie, because you guys made similar points, yet you had different experiences. Charlie, in your piece, you break down white privilege, which ironically many persons who enjoy such privilege don't seem to be aware of, which would connect to what Anya is saying. How did you come to understand and perhaps benefit from white privilege?
I came to understand it in school, in high school, taking classes, sociology, anthropology. And from the moment I heard it, I said, well, this makes perfect sense. Uh, we take these classes and we learn of people who are underprivileged. We learn of racism. We learn of these grievances in our history. But yet we rarely take the time to look on what is the opposite end of that spectrum of people who may be overprivileged or who may be receiving unearned privileges.
Mm-hmm.
Then I studied it again in college and I wrote papers on it and I said, well, this is common sense. This is common sense. The ways in which that I uh, experience those privileges, I really outlined it in my essay that I wrote, but it really is just a kind of a day-to-day benefit of the doubt that I experience and that I receive that to me is unsubstantiated. I I I am just sort of given day-to-day allowances of where people just kind of give me this trust that I think is unearned. Um, and to go back to what I initially wrote about the situation with my mom and the pizza delivery guy and giving us this pizza and us not paying for it and being trusted to pay for it later on, um, was astounding to me, but like a clear example of such privilege.
Mm-hmm. And you also went on to say that, you know, well, you spoke about the other side where you said you were actually teased for being white at school, which you
Right.
attributed to a complex dynamic at play, a dynamic of uneven scales and deserved distrust for white people. What makes you say this?
I, what I shared was and is very personal, and so I can speak primarily from a personal lens.
Yeah.
Uh, and my experience was that at being 12, 11, 12, 13 years old and having those experiences, and that particular experience, I remember clearly not understanding necessarily the language, just knowing that people are going, white boy, white boy, white boy, white boy, and whatever, and feeling taunted and feeling as if it was a bad thing and feeling insulted, but then witnessing the one instance that I outlined of me going, okay, black boy, and seeing the visible hurt of my classmates and seeing this kind of silence come across them and me kind of instinctively understanding that there was something below the words in our childhood that we were using that was operating there. And now that I'm older, and I can see that we were children mimicking this 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 unjust sort of system of conversation.
Yeah.
Um, and the deserved distrust for white people is, to me, common sense. It's just, it's just, for me, and growing up in Trinidad, we make up what, 0.65, 0.66, or 0.67% of the population. It's so small. I I have friends and coworkers and had experiences of having conversations with Trinidadians who um, were non-white, but had maybe never had like a full long conversation with a Trini white person or just to speak to Anya's point of this disconnect that we have. And in many of those instances, I would experience this a hesitancy, ask questions that to me were a little bit bizarre, but once I took the second to sort of understand our divides and whatnot, and our histories as not just Trinidadians, but as a global community, I go, of course, if there's that whatsoever, I understand. Now let's just have a conversation and talk.
Yeah, it's very powerful that both of you, and I think Emily Aboud has also been on social media calling for that dialogue, calling for that conversation, particularly among the white and Syrian community, because previously, as you both said, this is not something that would come out as in terms of a conversation that would happen openly, but from what I've read on both your posts, it's conversations that happen or even language that is used within the community itself that perhaps may appear racist, but perhaps persons don't even understand or interpret it as racist? Anya?
Could you repeat that again? Sorry, you went out.
I was suggesting that I was congratulating you both on having the conversation publicly and bringing it to the fore, and as you said, holding your community accountable. But in both of your posts, you talk about the conversations that happen down the islands or at home and so on that could potentially be seen as racist, but perhaps not even the understanding that it is perhaps racist in terms of the conversations and what shapes, because we talk about racism as being learned, racism as being learned behavior from family socialization. And Anya, you let me push it forward because you spoke about people coming together and sit with the discomfort, rage, and confusion that comes with introspection. And perhaps this has not happened before, but you're calling for it now. Yeah?
For sure. I think if you are not in some way to think differently, to reimagine, to even reword the words that you use, you're not going to do so because there's comfort, there's a certain comfort in normality and what you know. Somebody told me recently, of course, Danny, you're trying to instigate people to rethink their whole way of life. You grow up knowing something and that is that. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly what I'm trying to do. If we can't really, sometimes I find about Trinidad and relations in Trinidad is we're all cordial and kind and everybody is good morning. But below that, there's like a double layer, like an internal layer of distrust. And Charles and I were talking about it yesterday. There is this whole sea of emotions and distrust and that is below the surface that we don't get at. And that's uncomfortable work. Nobody wants to sit down and have somebody tell us that they're wrong or the way of life they've been living, rather not wrong, but yes, wrong. But in addition to that, it's more complicated than right and wrong, black and white. It's always more complicated. Nobody wants to be told that the way of life that they've been leading is harmful to other people. That is hard. We have to, this is like, another thing about this conversation is that it is emotional. And it is very difficult for us to be emotional in a public sphere. Everybody, you grew up learning, if you're going to cry, close your door. Keep that in your back, keep it in your back pocket, tuck it away, those emotions. That's difficult, but healing and honest conversation comes from a recognition that we are all sentient and emotional beings. And if we have that level of consciousness, that level of awareness, that level of empathy within a public discourse, I see it going very far.
Well,
and like nobody wants to call out their granny on saying all the time when things at the dinner table. What granny will, they can't say that granny, it's granny. But we have to engage with this in a way that is historically minded, that is mindful, because a generation above us look very different to our generation right now, people in their 20s and so. And we have to think of how Granny grew up. Granny grew up in a quote unquote different time, but it's not that different. It's still just as stratified. But coax people into conversations, meet them on their own terms, meet people on their own terms when trying to start conversations like this, and recognize that it is okay to feel confused, to feel ashamed, to feel anything you feel. At the end of this, like, what we need to change is how we think of different feelings as negative or positive. If it could be we just feeling and we working through this together, that's the solidarity. That is the kind of engagement that I want to see moving forward in this dialogue and conversation.
Well, I want to thank you both for bringing the conversation to the forefront. Congratulations, and for the courage to do this. And thank you for joining me this morning. That was Anya Quesnel, writer, student of critical studies, and actor Charlie Reid. And I encourage you to go onto their social media pages, their Facebook pages, so that you can read the entire discourse, because they've both given a lot of thought, and it's worth reading. And we can continue the conversation, which we'll be doing after the break with Amilcar Sanatan after this.